Travel this land to the Rocky Mountains, travel this land to the prairies wide. Travel this land to the Great Lakes shine, and travel.
It's time to travel this land with Canada's Balladeer, Whiz Bryant. On today's program, Whiz brings us the fascinating true story of a Canadian folk hero. The story of a man who was both a legendary hero of the environmental movement and an imposter. A song for Grey Owl.
I first heard of Grey Owl in the winter of 1975. I was looking for song material, true stories about Canadian folk heroes that would make good songs. I had learned the songs of Robin Hood and the Ballad of Davy Crockett as a child, and I was convinced that my own country must have some folk heroes of stature that were worth writing a song about. I opened the newspaper one day and read an advertisement about a display of Grey Owl's original writings and other personal artifacts at a shopping mall in Kamloops, BC. I read about this trapper turned author and conservationist, and looking at a photograph of his strong, haunted face and piercing eyes, dressed in full Indian regalia, I began to feel a strange fascination creeping over me.
Wrapped in his buckskins, walking the forest so tall, speaking to no one, watching the leaves as they fall, checking his traps for the beavers that died there today, finding their babies, he hears a voice start to say, Grey Owl, you're a man, and now you stand in a ravaged land, paradise.
I traveled to Kamloops to view the display. I learned that it had been lent to the mall by Dawn Bruce, an attractive middle-aged woman who it turns out was Grey Owl's daughter. I phoned her and she invited me to her small apartment in Kamloops, where she lived with her 2 teenage children. I stayed for 3 days, sleeping on her couch at night and in the day poring over Grey Owl's original manuscripts and his personal collection of books. He was a great fan of Emerson, the author of Self-Reliance, and other great metaphysical essays on the human spirit. The margins of the books were filled with Grey Owl's personal notations. Again, I felt the strange, somehow familiar sensation that I was touching something powerful and significant. I learned that Grey Owl was actually Archie Bellany, an Englishman left by his parents to be raised by 2 maiden aunts in Hastings, England. Born in 1888, Archie had a lonely and unhappy childhood. He found his escape in the exploration of the natural world, and in his imagination, he lived out his obsessive fascination with the North American Indians. He dreamed of becoming one, and at the age of 17, he fled his repressive life in England and traveled to Northern Ontario. Apart from his war service in World War I, in which he performed many remarkable feats of scouting, he remained in Canada's northern wilderness for the rest of his life. He lived with the Ojibwe on Bear Island near Temiskaming and had a short-lived marriage to an Ojibwe girl, daughter of the local chief. He learned the Ojibwe language. He dressed in buckskin and changed his name to Grey Owl. In Ojibwe, Wa Sha Kwan Asin, he who flies by night.
Throwing his gun to the ground, he let out a cry. In the black midnight forest, he's lifting his hands to the sky. His heart, it is torn, his eyes shining colder than steel. The owl is hooting, a man is learning to feel. Grey Owl, you're a man, and now you stand in a ravaged land.
years, Grey Owl earned his living as a trapper and guide. The stories and legends of his exploits in northern Ontario are too numerous to be told, but they were all amazing. Grey Owl preferred traveling by night, and it is said that he passed through Algonquin Park in a single night on a bet, all the while being pursued by a park ranger, who eventually rescued him when he fell through lake ice and nearly froze to death. Grey Owl was a legend around Biscotassing, a small northern hub and railroad town. He claimed to be the son of a Scot and an Apache, and although he visited Bisco only infrequently from his trapping grounds, his skills with knife and gun, his love for the ladies in the bottle, and for practical jokes filled his visits with excitement and anticipation. Occasionally he wound up on the wrong side of the law with his temper and revelry, but his canoeing, snowshoeing, and skiing skills kept him free to roam the vast wilderness he grew to love. His companions were few, his friends and admirers many. Like Paul Hogan in Crocodile Dundee, Grey Owl came to symbolize the free and wise spirit of wild northern Canada. Much as Hogan's creation, Mick Dundee, has come to reflect the spirit of wild Australia. Half truth and part fiction, these men created legends out of the fabric of the wilderness, its animals and native peoples, yet remained apart, like Emerson's self-reliant men. Around 1930, Grey Owl met and married a full-blooded Iroquois woman, literate and fiery, named Anahario. It was Anahario, sickened by the continuous slaughter of fur-bearing animals, that convinced Grey Owl to give up his freewheeling trapper's life and become an author and conservationist. "You have taken much from the wild," said Anahario. "This is your chance to give something back." And Grey Owl did. His first work, a dissertation on wolves and man's incredible distortion of their purpose and place in nature's plan, was written on long sheets of toilet paper and mailed to an outdoor magazine that published it and sent Grey Owl his first royalty check. Grey Owl published his first book, Men of the Last Frontier, in 1931. Conservation became his central theme, and his knowledge and passion for life in the wilderness began to capture the imagination of book readers throughout Canada, the United States, and most of all, in his native England. It was in the early 1930s that with Anahario's prodding, Grey Owl adopted 2 orphaned beaver kits. They built their beaver lodge inside one wall of Grey Owl's cabin, with a passage leading under the wall and down to the lake below. This provided Grey Owl with the opportunity to study the habits and personality of the beaver, the former subject of his traps.
He stands on the lectern platform. His face is tired and warm. He's the voice of nature, speaking and sounding the call, asking us to escape from the madness of it all. And now, young man, well, here you stand in a ravaged land, a paradise all are meant to share.
Grey Owl was amazed at his discoveries, at the intelligence, warmth, playfulness, and humor of the beaver. He began to call them his brothers, the beaver people, and they became the subjects of some of his most famous books, Pilgrims of the Wild, and his book for children, Sajo and the Beaver People. Grey Owl's books made him extremely popular. He traveled to England and made 2 lecture tours dressed in his Indian regalia. The English were charmed and intrigued. They listened entranced to his tales of the North and the need to make peace with nature and ourselves in a world perched on the edge of war and destruction. This was in 1938, just a year before Hitler's invasion of Poland. Grey Owl returned to Canada and established a beaver sanctuary at Lake Adjuwan in Prince Albert National Park, Saskatchewan. He built a beautiful log cabin at the far end of the lake that could only be reached by canoe. Yet a steady stream of visitors came to Grey Owl's cabin, including a future Prime Minister named John Diefenbaker. Grey Owl died at his cabin on April 13, 1938. He was only 50 years old. The last years of his life, he had pushed himself beyond even his great stores of endurance. He was obsessed with saving the wilderness from the mindless destruction of industrial man. After his death, the press discovered that Grey Owl was an imposter. He was not the Indian that he had claimed to be, but Archie Bellany, an Englishman turned frontiersman. His contributions to conservation were forgotten, his name discredited. When I left Dawn Bruce's apartment in Kamloops after my days of searching for Grey Owl, I remember the look of fire in her kind brown eyes. She was Grey Owl's daughter, and she had not forgotten, and neither will I.
Wrapped in his buckskins, walking the forest so tall, speaking to no one, watching the leaves as they fall, checking his traps for the beavers that died there today, finding their babies, he hears a voice start to say, Grey Owl, you're a man, and now you stand in a ravaged land, paradise, all are meant to share. To the Rocky Mountains.
You've been traveling this land with Canada's singing storyteller, Whiz Bryant. Please feel free to write to us with your comments. And join us again next time for another fascinating Canadian tale in story and song as we continue to travel this land.
To the Fraser Delta, travel this land to the Arctic Sea. Travel this land where the wild loons call, and travel this land, come along with me. Travel this land, take my hand and travel this land. Wrapped in his buckskins, walking the forest so tall, speaking to no one, watching the leaves as they fall, checking his traps for the beavers that died there today, finding their babies, he hears a voice start to say, Grey Owl, you're a man, and now you stand in a ravaged land, paradise, all are meant to share. Throwing his gun to the ground, he let out a cry. In the black midnight forest, he's lifting his hands to the sky. His heart, it is torn, his eyes shining colder than steel. The owl is hooting, a man is learning to feel. Gray owl, you're a man, and now you stand in a ravaged land, paradise, all are meant to share. He stands on the lectern platform, his face is tired and warm. He's the voice of nature, speaking and sounding the call, asking us to escape from the madness of it all.